Have you ever looked at the two people you would take a bullet for, only to realize they are the ones smiling and pulling the trigger? For 6 years, I built an empire, a flawless marriage, and a safe haven for my only sister. But in a city like Boston, greed never sleeps. Tonight, in front of hundreds of cameras, I will show them the true cost of betrayal. Watch closely how I burn them down. Hello, everyone. Before today's story begins, we'd like to share a quick message. YouTube recently removed our monetization, cutting off our income. If you enjoy this story, we humbly ask for just $1 to help pay our staff so they can make a living and keep creating for you. Thank you for saving us. Now, let's begin the story. I am Genesis Black. If you live in Boston and find your reputation plunging into a scandalous abyss, I am the person you call. As the founder of Aegis Vanguard Communications, a notorious crisis management firm, making problems disappear is my specialty. I sculpt public perception. I control the narrative. For the past 6 years, I have meticulously crafted the most vital and successful campaign of my entire life. My husband, Julian Vance. Julian is a rising star in the political arena, a man whose immaculate image is a direct product of my relentless strategy and sleepless nights. And standing right beside him, acting as his personal assistant and image manager, is my only sister, Chloe Black. We were the golden trio. We were a fortress, or so I deeply believed. The shift did not happen overnight. It was not a sudden explosion of betrayal, but a slow, creeping rot, a subtle fracture in the glass house I had built to protect us all. It started with the little things so minuscule and insignificant you would feel entirely insane for even pointing them out. My car keys, which I unfailingly placed on the marble console by the front door every single evening, would mysteriously end up in the pocket of my winter coat buried in the closet. I would simply shrug it off as absent-mindedness brought on by overwork. Then came the schedule disruptions. 2 crucial client meetings were abruptly canceled on a Tuesday afternoon. When I stormed into the office and demanded an explanation from my secretary, she looked at me with pure, genuine confusion. She stated clearly that I had called her from my home line the night before, instructing her to clear my entire afternoon because I was feeling overwhelmed. I had absolutely no memory of making that phone call. I checked my call logs, and the outgoing call was indeed there. A cold shiver ran down my spine. Was I truly losing my grip? The suffocating unease tightened around my throat the evening I found the bottle. It was a small, amber plastic cylinder resting innocently on my mahogany nightstand. Sleeping pills, a heavy prescription-grade sedative. I stared at the label, my name printed boldly across the crisp white sticker. Yet I had never visited a physician for insomnia. I had never purchased them. When I asked Julian about it, he looked up from his newspaper with eyes full of gentle worry. He said I had picked them up from the pharmacy 3 days ago, complaining about nightmares. He even stroked my hair, telling me I was pushing myself too hard. The true horror of my situation began to reveal itself not in empty, quiet rooms, but in crowded, public ones. Julian, the loving and attentive husband, began to skillfully weaponize his affection against me. At a lavish charity dinner surrounded by our most prominent financial donors, I momentarily forgot the name of a minor city councilman. Before I could smoothly recover with a polite joke, Julian placed a heavy, warm hand on my bare shoulder. Genesis has been under a tremendous amount of stress lately, he announced to the entire table, his voice dripping with honeyed, paternal concern. Her memory has been slipping quite a bit these past few months. The doctor says she desperately needs to slow down and rest. I froze completely, the heavy silver fork trembling slightly in my grasp. I looked across the table and met Chloe's eyes. My sweet, loyal younger sister offered me a look of profound, dramatic pity. She reached over, gently squeezing my hand in front of everyone. "It is entirely okay, Jen," she whispered softly, yet pitched her voice perfectly loud enough for the wealthy donors to hear every word. "We are here for you. Julian and I will take care of absolutely everything. I am a crisis manager. I survive by reading between the lines. I do not believe in random coincidences, and I certainly believe in patterns. The pattern finally crystallized one rainy evening in late November. I had returned home from the office early, finding the massive house suffocatingly quiet. I walked softly down the carpeted hallway toward Julian's private study. The heavy oak door was slightly ajar. The room beyond, cloaked in absolute, pitch-black darkness. Through the narrow gap, I saw two silhouettes, Julian and Chloe. They were standing impossibly close to one another, their bodies almost melding into one single shadow. The air between them was thick with a silent, heavy intimacy that made my stomach churn. My hand instinctively reached for the wall switch. The brass chandelier instantly flooded the room with harsh, blinding light. What happened next was without a doubt the most terrifying moment of my entire life. They did not jump, they did not gasp, flinch, or scramble away like guilty lovers caught in the act. Instead, the physical space between them widened with the precise mechanical grace of a heavily rehearsed choreography. Julian smoothly turned to his mahogany desk, picking up a silver pen, while Chloe adjusted a stack of manila folders, her facial expression perfectly composed and utterly blank. "Genesis," Julian said, his tone entirely casual and unbothered. "You are home early. Are you feeling unwell again?" I stood frozen in the doorway, staring deeply into the perfectly calm, unblinking eyes of the two people I loved most in this world. A cold, absolute, and terrifying clarity washed over my entire being. This was not a cheap, sordid affair. An affair is messy, fueled by sudden passion and hastily hidden by sheer panic. This was clinical. This was a calculated, highly organized psychological operation. They were working together, feeding me elaborate lies, moving my personal belongings, buying those dangerous pills, and actively planting toxic seeds of doubt in the minds of everyone we knew. They were not just trying to betray my trust. They were orchestrating a meticulous gaslighting campaign designed to make me completely doubt my own sanity. They wanted the world to see a mad woman losing her grip on reality. They wanted to lock me inside my own failing mind and swallow the key, leaving them free to take over everything I had built. In that blinding moment of realization, a lesser woman might have crumbled, but I did not cry, I did not scream, and I certainly did not throw wild accusations. I simply smiled, letting the mask of the fragile, confused wife slip perfectly into place. I stepped fully into the room, ready to play my part. If they wanted a war of perception, they had picked the wrong enemy. The human brain is a remarkable machine. When pushed past the absolute limit of emotional endurance, it does not shatter, it recalibrates. The confusion and the heartbreak that had been suffocating me evaporated the moment the lights flicked on in that dark study. The warm, beating heart of a devoted wife died on the spot, instantly replaced by the cold, calculating processor of a seasoned crisis manager. I was no longer the confused victim wandering through a fog of gaslighting. I was a predator, standing perfectly still in the tall grass, observing the precise movements of my prey. The first critical step was neutralizing the chemical warfare they were waging against me. The very next evening, my sister knocked softly on my bedroom door. Chloe entered carrying a porcelain tray with a steaming cup of chamomile tea and two of those heavy sedatives. She sat on the edge of my mattress, her face arranged in a mask of pristine sibling concern. "You need to rest your mind, Genesis," she murmured, brushing a stray lock of hair from my forehead. "Julian and I are so incredibly worried about your recent episodes," meeting her compassionate gaze with a faint smile. I rested the two pills on my tongue. I took a deep draught of the hot tea, tipped my head backward, and made a deliberate show of swallowing. Chloe lingered for precisely 15 minutes, waiting until my eyelids began to flutter before silently easing out of the room. The instant the latch clicked shut, I expelled the melting capsules into a ready tissue, having secreted them deep in the pocket between my cheek and gum. For the remainder of the night, I remained utterly still in the darkness, keeping my breathing slow and measured while my mind surged with crystalline focus, entirely alert. I traced the muffled noises of Julian navigating the house, logging the exact number of minutes he spent murmuring out in the hall. I needed hard, undeniable data. In my line of work, you are only as powerful as the secrets you hold. I bypassed my usual corporate security contacts and reached out to the deepest, darkest corner of my professional network. That was how I acquired the services of Marcus Thorne. Marcus was a former cybersecurity agent who operated entirely off the grid. He did not ask questions, and he did not leave fingerprints. I met him in a damp, underground parking garage, handing over $50,000 in untraceable cash. Within 48 hours, my beautiful, suffocating home and my pristine corner office at Aegis Vanguard were completely wired. Marcus installed microscopic lenses inside the ventilation grills, the smoke detectors, and the binding of the hardcover book sitting on Julian's desk. We turned their private sanctuary into a digital panopticon. However, Julian and Chloe were exceptionally disciplined. They never called each other. They never sent text messages that could be intercepted or subpoenaed. They knew the digital footprint of an affair could ruin a political career in a matter of hours. But Marcus was a ghost who hunted other ghosts. He noticed a bizarre anomaly in the network traffic routing from Julian's private laptop. They were using a method as old as the early days of cyber espionage. Julian had created a heavily encrypted, anonymous email account. He would log in, type a message, and simply save it in the drafts folder. Chloe would log into the exact same account from her own device minutes later, read the draft, reply underneath it, and save it again. Once the conversation was over, the draft was permanently deleted. No emails were ever actually sent or received, leaving absolutely zero transmission history. But they forgot one crucial detail. Marcus had already planted a covert keylogger on Julian's personal keyboard. Every single keystroke was being recorded and sent directly to a secure server we controlled. Sitting in my sterile, locked office late one Friday night, I finally read the transcripts. The words on the glowing screen hit me with the force of a freight train, yet my pulse never quickened above 70 beats per minute. This was not a story of forbidden romance or undeniable lust. There was no passion in their secret words. There was only commerce. My husband and my sister were not simply sleeping together. They were meticulously constructing a fraudulent medical dossier. They had a corrupt, private psychiatrist on their secret payroll. For the past 6 months, they had been feeding him fabricated reports of my erratic behavior, my supposed memory loss, and my non-existent emotional outbursts. They were building a rock-solid, legally binding case to declare me mentally incompetent. Their endgame was breathtaking in its sheer, ruthless greed. Once I was quietly institutionalized or heavily medicated into submission, Julian would gain full medical and legal power of attorney. He would immediately strip me of my voting shares and my executive control over Aegis Vanguard Communications. Worse, he planned to completely drain the massive Political Action Committee funds I had personally secured for his upcoming Senate run. We were talking about millions of dollars, legally siphoned away under the guise of managing his incapacitated wife's estate. And Chloe, my sweet, devoted little sister, was not just securing a wealthy lover. She was auditioning for my life. The transcripts detailed their ultimate launch sequence. In exactly 1 month, we were scheduled to host the annual fundraising gala. It was the most prestigious political event in the state, packed with heavy-hitting donors, state senators, and ruthless media conglomerates. Julian planned to take the stage that night, shedding perfectly timed tears, to publicly announce my tragic, sudden withdrawal from public life due to a severe mental breakdown. Chloe would be standing right there, a pillar of strength, stepping into the spotlight to take over my agency and act as the new, tragic, but resilient matriarch of the Vance political dynasty. They had plotted every single variable. They had calculated the media optics, the legal loopholes, and the exact dosage of the pills they were pushing on me. They thought they had trapped me inside a perfectly coded algorithm of betrayal. I closed the laptop, the screen reflecting my completely emotionless face. They wanted a public tragedy at the gala in exactly 4 weeks. I decided right then and there to give them exactly what they wanted. I would give them a tragedy so monumental it would be taught in public relations courses for the next 50 years. To survive in close quarters with your executioners requires a very specific type of psychological endurance. You must learn to breathe the same air as the people actively plotting your destruction, yet never let your heart rate betray the truth. My home was no longer a sanctuary, it was a theater, and I was performing the role of a lifetime. I had to become the very thing they were trying to invent, a fragile, broken woman spiraling into early-onset dementia. It is a terrifying thing to act insane while your mind is operating with terrifying clarity. I leaned into their gaslighting with a vengeance. I began to intentionally misplace vital documents. During a dinner party with 3 prominent state senators, I casually knocked a full glass of red wine onto Julian's expensive white silk rug, bursting into perfectly orchestrated, hysterical tears while frantically apologizing that my hands just would not stop shaking. Another morning. I stood staring blankly at the security panel by the front door, weeping because I claimed I could not remember the 4-digit access code I had used every single day for the past 4 years. Julian rushed to my side, wrapping his strong arms around my trembling shoulders. He looked over my head, locking eyes with Chloe, who was standing at the bottom of the staircase. I could not see their faces, but I could feel the smug, victorious energy radiating from their bodies. They fully believed the heavy sedatives and their relentless psychological warfare were finally breaking my brain into pieces. They thought I was drowning in a fog. They had no idea I was the one steering the ship. Beneath the surface of my pathetic masquerade, Marcus and I were systematically draining their digital lifeblood, operating entirely in the shadows, usually between 2 and 4 in the morning when the house was dead silent. I would sit on the cold bathroom floor with an encrypted tablet. Marcus was pulling gigabytes of damning evidence from the deepest corners of their secure networks. The sheer scale of their betrayal was staggering. We found the black money. Julian was not just planning to steal my corporate shares. He was actively embezzling from his own senatorial campaign fund. He was systematically funneling hundreds of thousands of dollars through a complex web of shell companies. Marcus traced a single wire transfer of $250,000 directly into an offshore account registered under Chloe's middle name. They were building a massive nest egg to fund their new, glamorous life once I was safely locked away in a padded room. But the financial crimes were sterile. The audio files were the true test of my emotional discipline. Marcus had managed to hack the internal diagnostic microphone of Julian's luxury sport utility vehicle. One evening, sitting alone in the dark, I listened to a high-definition recording taken just 3 days prior. I heard the unmistakable, rhythmic sounds of my husband and my sister having frantic sex on the back seat while parked in the VIP lot of a prestigious country club. But the physical betrayal did not hurt anymore. It was the conversation afterward that turned my blood into ice. I listened to them catching their breath. Then, Chloe laughed. It was a cruel, sharp sound. "She wore 2 different earrings to the breakfast meeting today," Chloe giggled, her voice dripping with venom. "I did not even have to hide one. She is doing the work for us." "She is pathetic," Julian replied, his tone laced with heavy disgust. "I can barely look at her without feeling sick. Just a few more weeks, baby. Once the board sees her fall apart at the gala, the judge will grant me full conservatorship within 48 hours. I did not smash the tablet. I simply categorized the audio file, backed it up to 3 separate cloud servers, and went to sleep. The tension of living a double life nearly snapped on a rainy Thursday afternoon. Marcus informed me he needed physical access to the router inside Julian's private study to install a permanent hardware bypass. We planned it perfectly. Julian was locked in a lengthy city budget hearing, and Chloe had confirmed a 2-hour deep tissue massage appointment across town. Marcus arrived at the house disguised as a broadband technician. Carrying a heavy toolkit, I led him into the study, and he immediately went to work unscrewing the wall plates. 15 minutes into the operation, the heavy deadbolt on the front door violently clicked open. My heart slammed against my ribs. It was Chloe. She had canceled her appointment early. I was standing in the kitchen, pouring a glass of sparkling water, while Marcus was trapped inside the study at the end of the hall, the router completely disassembled on the floor. "Genesis, are you home?" Chloe called out, the sound of her expensive high heels clicking sharply against the marble entryway. Click, clack, click, clack. She was walking purposefully down the hallway, heading straight toward the study to drop off Julian's dry cleaning. I had exactly 5 seconds to act. I needed a distraction, not just a noise, but a crisis, a genuine emergency that would instantly command her entire focus. I looked at the heavy, crystal water pitcher resting on the granite countertop. I did not hesitate. I shoved the pitcher off the edge. It hit the floor with a deafening crash, shattering into 1,000 jagged, glittering shards. But a clumsy mistake was not enough to stop her. She might just yell at me from the hallway. I needed something visceral. I collapsed to my bare knees into a sea of shattered reality. I grasped the sharpest, most painful truth I could find, holding it tightly, and allowed its harsh edge to strike deep into my core. The pain was blinding, white-hot, and absolute. Searing agony shot up my arm as warm, crimson blood instantly welled up and spilled out, splashing brightly against the pristine white marble. I opened my mouth and let out a blood-curdling, terrified scream. The clicking of the heels stopped dead, followed by the frantic sound of Chloe running toward the kitchen. She skidded around the corner, her eyes going wide with genuine horror as she saw me kneeling in a pool of blood and shattered crystal, clutching my fiercely bleeding hand. "Oh my God, Genesis!" she shrieked, dropping the dry cleaning and throwing herself onto the floor beside me. She grabbed a kitchen towel and pressed it hard against my open wound. In the absolute chaos of her panic, neither of us looked down the hallway, but over Chloe's shoulder. I saw the dark shadow of Marcus silently slipping out of the study, gliding out the side patio door like a ghost, leaving no trace behind. The operation was secure. Julian arrived home 30 minutes later. Chloe had hastily bandaged my hand and given me a heavy dose of my fake sedatives, which I had secretly tucked into my cheek. I was sitting slumped on the living room sofa, my eyes half closed, playing the role of the heavily medicated, catatonic victim to absolute perfection. Julian stormed into the room, taking one look at the bloody towels piled in the trash can. He pulled Chloe roughly by the arm into the adjacent dining room, leaving the French doors slightly cracked. They thought I was completely zoned out, lost in a chemical fog. They had no idea my smartwatch was actively recording every single frequency in the room. Through the narrow gap in the doors, I watched Julian pace the floor. He ran a hand aggressively through his hair, looking back at my slumped figure with eyes full of cold, calculating impatience. "We cannot keep doing this. Chloe, she is becoming a massive liability. What if she pulls a stunt like this in public before we are ready?" Julian hissed, his voice tight with anger. "It is fine, Julian," Chloe whispered back, placing a soothing hand on his chest. "The board is already whispering. The medical file is complete. We just need to get through the charity dinner." Julian looked at my heavily bandaged, bleeding hand. A cruel, terrifyingly hollow smile crept across his handsome face. He leaned in close to Chloe's ear, but his voice carried perfectly through the silent house, straight into my microphone. "It is almost over," he whispered. "This crazy bitch will be in an asylum soon. Let her bleed." Sitting on the sofa, feeling the sharp, rhythmic throbbing of my injured palm, I did not cry. My pulse remained perfectly steady. Later that night, sitting alone in the master bathroom, I carefully treated my hand using a specialized first aid kit, perfectly numb to the physical pain. I downloaded that exact audio file from my watch to my secure encrypted drive. I created a brand new, empty folder on my desktop. I dragged the audio file, the financial records, and the incriminating transcripts into it. I renamed the folder The Gala Night. The trap was fully set. The bait was bleeding. It was time to invite the predators to dinner. With exactly 7 days remaining before the grand charity dinner, the time for gathering intelligence was officially over. The trap was meticulously built, and now it was time to place the bait. My enemies were incredibly arrogant, and arrogance is a wonderfully predictable flaw. When you give a greedy person exactly what they desire on a silver platter, they rarely pause to check the food for poison. They simply gorge themselves. I decided it was time to serve the main course. I scheduled an emergency, closed-door meeting with the senior board of directors at Aegis Vanguard Communications. These were the men and women who had helped me build my empire. The ruthless corporate sharks who usually respected nothing but absolute strength and raw numbers. When I walked into that sleek, glass-walled conference room, I did not wear my usual tailored power suit. I wore a slightly wrinkled silk blouse, applied minimal makeup, and let the dark shadows under my eyes show prominently. I sat at the head of the heavy mahogany table, took a deep, trembling breath, and forced a single, perfect tear to roll down my cheek. I told them I was completely broken. I confessed that the intense stress of the past 12 months had fundamentally shattered my mental health, and I could no longer steer the ship safely. I promised them a smooth, elegant, and highly publicized transition. I announced that at the upcoming gala, in front of the entire city and our most vital investors, I would officially declare I was temporarily stepping back and handing the operational reins to my husband and my sister. The board members exchanged uneasy, pitying glances, murmuring their hollow sympathies. The hook was set perfectly deep. The news traveled back to Julian and Chloe faster than a wildfire. That evening, the atmosphere inside my house shifted entirely. The heavy, suffocating tension of the past few months was suddenly replaced by an almost intoxicating, giddy electricity. Julian poured me a generous glass of expensive red wine, kissing my forehead with a sudden, overwhelming burst of fake affection. He praised my bravery. He told me how deeply proud he was of my mature decision to prioritize my health over my relentless career. Chloe sat beside me on the velvet sofa, holding my hand and actually weeping tears of sheer joy. They were absolutely ecstatic. They genuinely believed my spirit had finally snapped under the weight of their psychological torture and chemical warfare. They thought they had achieved total victory without ever having to officially pull the trigger and drag me into a messy courtroom. They were so completely blinded by the sparkling illusion of their own brilliance that they never once looked down to see the thick wire snare wrapping tightly around their ankles. The very next morning, Julian eagerly presented me with a massive stack of legal documents. These were the power of attorney transfers, the medical directives, and the corporate proxy authorizations he desperately needed to officially seize control of my life and my fortune. He stood over me at the kitchen island, offering me a heavy gold fountain pen with a hungry, vibrating energy he could barely conceal. He thought he was watching me happily sign my own death warrant. He had absolutely no idea he was signing his own. What my handsome, greedy husband completely failed to understand was that my personal corporate attorneys were infinitely smarter than the corrupt, cheap lawyers he had hired in secret, deep within page 47 of the primary asset transfer agreement, buried under a mountain of dense, impenetrable legal jargon. I had woven a beautifully lethal trap. I included strict, irrevocable anti-embezzlement clauses and fiduciary lock-ins tied directly to severe federal oversight guidelines. I made sure that his new authority triggered automatic, non-negotiable audits of any transferred funds. The exact second my black ink dried on that crisp paper, every single dark money transfer Julian had made over the past 6 months, every hidden offshore account, and every stolen campaign dollar instantly ceased being a private, messy marital dispute. It immediately metamorphosed into highly documented, undeniable federal wire fraud. By willingly taking legal ownership of my portfolio, Julian had just chained himself to a sinking ship loaded heavily with federal crimes. I smiled softly, signed my name with elegant, sweeping strokes, and handed him the pen. He practically snatched it from my fingers, his eyes gleaming with uncontrollable greed. To seal the grand illusion, I took Chloe out for a lavish afternoon of shopping at the most exclusive boutiques in the downtown district. I insisted on buying her the absolute perfect gown for the gala. We stood in a private, luxurious fitting room completely surrounded by floor-to-ceiling mirrors. She emerged from behind the velvet curtain wearing a breathtaking, custom-tailored emerald silk dress that cost roughly $25,000. It clung to her perfectly, shimmering brightly like a second skin. She stared at her own reflection with absolute, naked ambition, admiring the powerful, wealthy woman she believed she was about to become. I stood quietly behind her, placing my hands gently on her bare shoulders, meeting her gaze in the mirror. "You look absolutely magnificent, Chloe," I whispered softly. "You are the true light of our family. You have been the strong pillar holding everything together while I have been falling apart. The spotlight at the gala belongs entirely to you." She blushed deeply and thanked me, her eyes sparkling with malicious triumph. She was completely intoxicated by the beautiful, elaborate lie I was feeding her. While Chloe spun around gracefully in front of the tall mirrors, admiring the expensive emerald silk, my right hand was moving rapidly underneath the heavy wool of my winter coat. I was typing a secure message on my hidden phone, coordinating the final, devastating technical adjustments with Marcus. I was silently rewriting the entire internal run of show for the charity dinner. I was authorizing Marcus to bypass the hotel security firewalls, override the master projection booth, and load the devastating digital payload directly into the main presentation sequence. The juxtaposition of that afternoon was profoundly poetic. My husband was resting comfortably in his private study, gleefully tallying the fortune he believed he had cleverly taken from me. My sister twirled before a mirror, already rehearsing the tearful, triumphant speech she planned to deliver upon my ultimate downfall. They were completely lost in a euphoric daze of unearned victory, celebrating what they thought was my definitive ruin, and I stood right beside them, perfectly serene, quietly tracing the edges of my final masterstroke. The board was set, the pieces were locked tightly into place. The final countdown had officially begun, and an absolute reckoning was coming with me. The air inside the grand ballroom of Boston's most opulent hotel was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and roasted filet mignon. It was exactly 8 o'clock in the evening. The annual charity gala had drawn over 500 of the most powerful people in the state. State senators, tech billionaires, and ruthless media tycoons sat shoulder to shoulder beneath massive, glittering crystal chandeliers. Along the back wall, a solid line of press photographers and television crews stood ready, their camera lenses reflecting the brilliant stage lights. Everything was perfectly in its place for a spectacular show. I sat rigidly at the center VIP table, my shoulders intentionally slumped forward, my hands resting weakly in my lap. I wore a pale, unassuming gray gown, fading perfectly into the background like a ghost. Up on the main stage, bathed in a warm, golden spotlight, my husband was delivering the performance of his life. Julian looked absolutely devastating in a custom black tuxedo, his voice booming with rich, manufactured sincerity as he spoke passionately about the unbreakable sanctity of family values. Standing just 2 steps behind him, perfectly framed by the camera angles, was Chloe. She was a vision in that $25,000 emerald silk dress. She played her part with terrifying perfection, casting a look of deep, sorrowful devotion toward Julian, before shifting her eyes down to me. For a fraction of a second, when the press cameras flashed away, her lips curled into a sharp, victorious smirk. She looked at me not as a sister, but as a conqueror surveying the ruins of a defeated kingdom. She truly believed I was entirely broken, sedated, and waiting to surrender my crown. Inside my small silver clutch, my hidden mobile phone vibrated exactly once, a single, sharp pulse against my fingertips. I slowly opened the clasp and glanced down at the glowing screen. It was a message from an encrypted number. Marcus was currently standing inside the elevated projection booth at the back of the massive hall, dressed flawlessly in the black uniform of a hotel audio technician. The message contained only 6 words: "The bullet is in the chamber." My pulse, which had been perfectly steady for the past 3 weeks, finally began to race, not with fear, but with absolute, primal anticipation. The countdown had officially hit 0. On stage, the heavy applause rolled through the room as Julian concluded his speech on loyalty and sacrifice. He smiled softly, raising a hand to quiet the wealthy crowd. Then, he stepped down from the elevated podium and walked directly toward my table. The spotlight followed him, casting a glaring white circle around us. The entire ballroom fell into a hushed, reverent silence. He reached out, taking my cold, trembling hand in his warm one, pulling me gently to my feet. He brought his wireless microphone up to his perfectly sculpted mouth. And now, my beloved wife, Genesis, has an important announcement to share with all of us tonight, Julian said, his voice dripping with a sickly, tragic sweetness that made my stomach turn. A polite, murmuring wave of applause rippled through the hundreds of seated guests. Julian stepped back, offering me the stage, fully expecting me to weep, to falter, and to publicly resign from my own life. I let go of his hand. I turned and faced the grand staircase leading up to the podium, and in that precise fraction of a second, the fragile, shattered woman they had spent 6 months meticulously destroying simply ceased to exist. I did not stumble. My footsteps were not wobbly or hesitant. I placed my silver stiletto onto the first wooden step with the heavy, undeniable force of a judge dropping a gavel. I straightened my spine, rolling my shoulders back until I stood at my full, commanding height. The collective breath of the massive ballroom seemed to hitch in unison as I walked powerfully to the center of the stage. I gripped the sides of the podium, ignoring the hundreds of wealthy faces staring up at me. Instead, I looked directly into the glowing red lens of the primary broadcasting camera, fully aware that tens of thousands of people were watching the live stream at this exact moment. The air in the opulent room suddenly froze, turning brittle and cold as ice. The executioner had taken the stage. I looked down at the mahogany podium. There was no folded piece of paper in my hands. I did not need a script to deliver an execution. I leaned close to the microphone, letting the absolute silence of the room stretch until it became almost unbearable. I smiled, a small, terrifyingly calm gesture. "My husband is absolutely right," I said, my voice echoing clearly off the high, vaulted ceilings. "I am sick, but my disease is called blindness, and tonight I have just been cured." I raised my right hand and snapped my fingers once. It was the signal. Up in the projection booth, Marcus hit the enter key. The massive, high-definition screen behind me, which was supposed to display a touching montage of my charitable work, instantly went black. A split second later, it exploded with blinding white light and undeniable truth. First came the bank statements. Giant, crisp images of the offshore accounts Julian had tried to hide. The red highlights tracked hundreds of thousands of dollars flowing directly from his senatorial campaign fund straight into a private trust registered under Chloe's name. I heard the first sharp gasps ripple through the front rows as the wealthy donors recognized their own stolen contributions. Next came the medical files, the forged psychiatric evaluations, the fake prescriptions, and the emails between Julian and his paid doctor detailing exactly how to chemically lobotomize me. The text messages were plastered 50 feet high for the entire city to read. But the absolute killing blow was the video. The screen shifted to the crystal clear, night vision footage taken from the interior of Julian's luxury vehicle. The massive ballroom was suddenly filled with the unmistakable, heavy breathing of my husband and my sister entangled in the back seat. But I did not let the crowd wallow in the scandal of a simple affair. The video cut directly to the conversation that followed. The audio pumped through the state-of-the-art surround sound system. "Look at these pathetic donors," Julian's voice boomed from the speakers, dripping with arrogant disgust. "They write me $50,000 checks because they think I actually care about their stupid little charities. They are sheep, and Genesis is the biggest sheep of them all." The ballroom erupted. It was not a murmur. It was a violent, chaotic explosion of outrage. Over 500 people leaped to their feet. Dozens of glowing smartphone screens instantly shot up into the air, recording every single second of the brutal spectacle. Julian's face drained of all color, turning the sickly shade of ash. His perfect political mask violently shattered. He let out a feral, desperate shout and lunged toward the stage, his hands reaching out to rip the microphone from my grip. He never made it past the first step. 3 massive, heavily built men dressed in plain black suits stepped seamlessly out of the shadows. I had personally hired them from an elite private security firm 2 weeks ago. They slammed Julian backward into a floral arrangement, pinning his arms behind his back with effortless, bone-crushing force. "Genesis!" Julian screamed, his voice cracking with sheer panic. "Turn it off. Turn it off. Right now." I did not even blink. I looked past him to where Chloe was standing. Her $25,000 emerald dress suddenly looked like a cheap Halloween costume. She was hyperventilating, clawing at her own hair. "It is a lie," Chloe shrieked, her voice shrill and hysterical over the roaring crowd. "It is artificial intelligence. It is a deep fake. She is insane." As if answering her directly, the screen shifted one final time. It played the isolated audio track of Chloe sitting in my own living room, laughing cruelly. "The board of directors are just gullible dinosaurs," Chloe's recorded voice echoed brightly through the hall. "I am going to wrap them around my finger the second Genesis is locked up in the psych ward." I saw the faces of my senior board members sitting at table 4, their expressions hardened into absolute, unforgiving stone. Chloe collapsed onto her knees, burying her face in her hands, completely crushed by the undeniable weight of her own words. My work was done. I stepped away from the podium. I walked slowly down the center staircase, my head held high. The furious, screaming crowd parted for me like the Red Sea. No one dared to touch me. No one dared to speak to me. They simply stepped back, making way for the woman who had just orchestrated the most brutal public slaughter in the history of Boston politics. As I reached the grand mahogany double doors at the back of the ballroom, I paused and looked over my shoulder. Uniformed police officers were already pouring into the hall through the side entrances. My lawyers had delivered the unredacted financial files to the federal prosecutor exactly 1 hour before the gala began. I watched with profound, quiet satisfaction as the officers clamped heavy steel handcuffs onto Julian's wrists, reading him his rights for federal wire fraud and grand larceny. His glittering political career was completely obliterated in exactly 5 minutes. Chloe's future was gone, reduced to nothing more than a humiliating, viral punchline that would live forever on the internet. The next morning, the sun rose brightly over the city of Boston. I sat behind my sleek glass desk on the top floor of Aegis Vanguard Communications, holding a steaming cup of black coffee. My phone had been ringing continuously for 3 hours. The board of directors had unanimously voted to grant me absolute, uncontested control of the company. My reputation was not merely intact, it had ascended into the realm of terrifying legend. Every politician, every CEO, and every media outlet in the country now knew the absolute truth. You do not cross Genesis Black. I did not just survive the fire they tried to build around me. I became the fire. I took their betrayal, and I burned it to white-hot ash. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. We hope you enjoyed it. As an ad-free channel, your support is what keeps us alive. Please support Zoe Revenge Stories with just $1 via the QR code on the screen, or click the link in the description box or pinned comment. Also, we'd love to connect with you. Please leave a comment telling us which city or state you're listening from. Thank you for standing with us, and see you in the next stories.